Good. So, what is life? What's life? Come on, you know it. You have it. Right? No, you don't. What's life? Okay. So then let's say there's something that cells do that could be seen as life, maybe, right? So what does a cell do? What did the first cell do? What changed when that's when there was no life and then there was life? What happened? Any ideas?
It started to
Again,
split itself.
Hmm. Yeah, splitting is a good thing, but
Is it like, I don't know, like growing, metabolism, something?
metabolism, okay. Yeah, splitting, metabolism. So what does a metabolism do?
but isn't it something about this membrane forming?
Mhm.
And that kind of, because first there was this soup, this muddy thing that we kind of evolved from. I don't know what it's called in English. But
Yeah,
then
but
there was this membrane, so that this created this unity of life, and then this unity after that kept like splitting and becoming organisms. So
yeah,
like
you're all right. You're all right. So there's a border between the inside and the outside, right? So there's an actual thing that does something as a membrane, and that membrane means that there's something going in and out. Okay. Hmm. And that process of organizing in and out and doing something, you could call that a metabolism. And then you while you're doing something, you're might might reproduce yourself. Okay, so you're splitting. You're doing um, that's it's quite a good description. I'll focus in a little bit more just now, but Alim, what are your thoughts? You had your hand up. Not anymore?
Sorry, sorry. It needed to communicate with the something or environment.
Yeah, by exchanging information in the
Yeah, by
form of
copying
something.
or the environment. If I mean, like when the cell realized that the alive and the conscious,
Mm.
and then maybe try to communicate with something.
Mhm. Yeah, if you see it in the most abstract form of communication, you could be right. Yeah, it's information exchange somehow. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so you could see it as that it creates balance by ingesting entropy, by taking in stuff that is around it and putting that stuff into order by making a copy of itself. Right? So you could say that we know second law of thermodynamics. Anybody familiar with that? Second law of thermodynamics? You don't, most of you don't know that yet, but that's why you fall apart when you grow old, right? Because the chaos in the system, the disorder of the system is increasing, right? That's your skin goes more saggy and things like that, right? That happens. That's the second law of thermodynamics in action in you, creating more chaos. But any bounded system and you can see the universe as a bounded system. In any bounded system, entropy increases over time. That's the fundamental thing why time has a direction. So if you haven't had that conversation with your alien yet about why does time have a direction here, it has in the entire universe, because you cannot unfreeze, unmelt the ice that you put in your drink. Frozen ice is much more ordered than molten ice, right? Once it's dissolved, you cannot reverse that process. You cannot reverse taking it out again, right? Okay, so this is why there's a direction in time. And life does the opposite. It tries to put order into things. It tries to structure things. And so you could say that it's a balancing act. Who's seen Avatar 2? Oh, I think it's in 1. So it's even in 1. When Jake goes to Awa, just before the final battle, and he asks Awa for help, and then what's his Nick what's his wife's name? Nectiri or something like that.
Natiri.
What is? Sorry?
Natiri or Netiri or something.
Nectiri, okay. Remember what she says? Awa doesn't take a side. Awa creates balance. Right? That's actually this exact idea put into a movie. So when you clump things together and you simultaneously integrate, so you put things together and differentiate at the same time, that increases the complexity of the thing that you do, right? So there's a difference between just clumping a bunch of atoms together, integrating them, and putting them into an order, right? If you put them into the right shape, into the right type of structure, you get something like this, right? Highly integrated and highly differentiated bunch of atoms. The more you do that, the higher the complexity. It's a bit like the flow channel. Who's heard of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi? No? Really, really interesting dude. If you ever wondered what happiness actually means, you should read his books. He has been studying what happiness means to people for all of his life. And he came up with the term flow when he was, which you've probably heard, right? You're in the flow, you're in the zone, all of that. That's what he found. And he found that as he was asking people across all sorts of cultures and all sorts of demographic backgrounds about when they feel happy. How's that feel? And they all started describing it in the same terms. And when it had something to do with flow, and that term came up very often. Okay, so he came up with essentially this. This is the core of what he found. This is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's life in one graph. He found that there's a flow happens if your challenge meets your skill, but is on the in the right way, so that you have to expand your skills. And as you expand your skills, you are ready for higher challenges, which makes you on a higher level of skills, which means that higher challenges force you to learn more skills, which make you ready for higher challenges, etc. Right? If you're if the challenge is too low, you're bored. If the challenge is too high, you're scared. Right? But if it's right for you, for the given context for you, then you're in flow. Right? Again, the same principle of balance and continuous movement of between integration and differentiation. You integrate, you build skill, and then differentiation could be translated into, okay, new challenge. Something new is happening, and you have to deal with it. Okay, now we have to deal with the break. And I was in the flow. Shit. Okay, so see you in 10 minutes. You wanted 10 minutes? Okay, good.
Puedes decir,
Okay, are we back? I'll wait until the cameras are on again, so that's good. Alim, you're here? Okay, I start here to get back into the flow. So it's this dance, right? It's this doing. Do you remember opponent processing last week in the session? Opponent processing between, well, now you'll begin to remember, between the default mode network and the task network, right? Same thing. So it's this dance of between two opponents creating balance and doing that simultaneously or at high frequency or something like that, right? But doing that. And just like that, if you do that continuously by embarrassing yourself all the time, for example, you increase the complexity of your mind, which makes you more capable of dealing with complex situations at the same time. That is represented in this thing, right? And you can apply this for baking bread, to playing tennis, to anything you want. And as you apply this, exposing yourself to challenges to acquire new skills and doing that all the time in various fields, you obviously also increase the space of your adjacent possible, right? So you can dream better, more interesting dreams. Okay, so this guy, another weird name, Greg Enriquez. I'll post that later. He was smoking a little too much weed, end of the 90s, and then this popped into his mind. And what he's trying to show with this thing is that there's this thing, the Big Bang, and then big chaos. And then things start clumping together. And that's what we call matter, right? The stuff that clumps together. And then there's this moment in which the increased complexity of the clumped matter pops into a new state of being. And that's what we could call life. Right? And then life becomes more and more complex, right? We're far away from those first cells that we were talking about. We've grown into complex hives of cells and of different organisms forming our organism together. And at one point, that becomes really, really complex. Its cell knows exactly what its job is. Do you know exactly what your job is? Who here knows exactly what your job is? Well, you have so many jobs. How do you choose which is the right job? Do you first have something to eat and then you have sex, or the other way around? Or do you learn something, or what do you do, right? Do you save the world? You fill your bank account? What's your job? Right? So it's not that easy as life to have an objective function that you work towards. So you collapse into mind. The complexity of life collapses into mind, or you could say consciousness, as a way to help you make sense of this, right? And think about which part of the world, which part of your decision-making process, relevance realization is most important to you, right? So your relevance realization increases. And it also becomes more and more complex. And then, as many, many complex minds doing things individually, what happens to them? Many individual, highly intelligent minds, what happens to them? Well, what happened to the Neanderthals, right? The Neanderthals were probably, no, they were surely stronger than us physically, but very likely they were also more intelligent individually. But they were really horrible at collaboration. So evolution did not favor sapiens. Evolution favored groups of sapiens. So the mind, as it grows more complex, collapses into culture, into groups of sapiens doing stuff together. Yeah, that's an interesting lens to look at things through. We can discuss it, but but it's just another representation of that same thing. Right? Things change shape. Slowly, then suddenly. When you, I don't have that on the slide here, unfortunately, but when you look at an exponential growth curve, right? Who here has had some contact with the startup world? Who's familiar with the term hockey stick? Anybody? Hockey stick? Nina, maybe? Nina, maybe? Okay, so what's a hockey stick? Let's try. Embarrass yourself a little. Come on.
It is sort of very flat, and then all of a sudden it curves and makes like a huge bend towards upwards or downwards, depending on the way you hold it.
So there's this there's this expectation that any startup, when they pitch to a VC, has a hockey stick in their presentation, because that's what the VC wants to see, right? It wants to see that, okay, we're developing something and then it'll blast through the roof. That's what we want. We don't want linear growth. We're not interested in that. We want to have this. But what those curves never show is that they're actually only the first part of a bell curve. Jeff Bezos, you know who that is? Who doesn't know who Jeff Bezos is? Okay, Jeff Bezos calls the first part of the bell curve day one and the second part day two. So when he identified that Amazon has now become a day two company after more than 20 years of existence. He started removing himself from Amazon because it's on a dying trajectory. Right? We're just seeing that with Google at this point, right? Who would have thought? But it happens to everyone. That's also life, right? But what happens, I'm gonna use compute to describe this. It's a very similar picture, actually. Who built the first computer? Girls, you have to know that. Very poetic name. Ada Lovelace. Ada Lovelace built the first computer. With the help of some dude who usually gets the credit for this, but Ada Lovelace actually did it. Just like it was a Hollywood actress who invented Wi-Fi. So another thing to add to that list. So Ada Lovelace built the first computer. It didn't run on an integrated circuit. It was a mechanical computer. Okay. Mechanical computer, you turn something and many cogs turn, and then you program it by shifting some of those cogs into a certain position, and by that you can ask it questions, and then it'll create a result in the form of some movement somewhere else. Okay. And so it went from, let's say, the ability to calculate for humans went from very stable over centuries or maybe millennia to suddenly very, very, very high. And if you had asked an expert on compute at the time of Ada Lovelace, they would have said, okay, the continuation of this is that at one point it'll start being flat. It'll start being more or less linear because there's physical constraints to the way you can move cogs against each other. Things become hot. There's always friction. There's physical constraints. You can optimize it. Incremental innovation, maybe remember Horizon 1. But then what happened? You know these old big radios, these big boxes, these wooden huge boxes? Maybe your grandma or your great grandma had a thing like that. Anybody seen these? Yeah. They have these things and they look like light bulbs, right? Tubes. That thing happened. Very unnoticeable in the beginning, right? It was probably too expensive to create them. They weren't that efficient, but suddenly they went through the roof. Okay. And what do you get? You get a curve that goes up, and then the second curve that goes up. It's stacked S curves. And it basically is the same picture. Then the tubes, same story. They go very hot. You have to deal with the heat. There's physical limits to that. Okay, so there's a limit to what we can do with this. Well, that's the limit we have to accept. Well, somebody came up with the integrated circuit. That was the disruption. That's Horizon 2, right? Now, what's next? Now, experts tell you Moore's law is over. Who can explain Moore's law here? Anybody? Moore's law? Heard of that? Heard of it, right? What is it? It's the doubling of compute that you can buy for $1 in 1.5 years. So every 18 months, you get twice the compute for the same price. That is exponential. So
Question. So that is
Yeah.
why, like, computers and phones and everything, that you can store more in a smaller space,
Mhm.
right? And also why it's cheaper to get a hold of it.
Well, I don't know what the curve exactly is, or replicate the doubling rate for storage. I don't know that, but I know the doubling rate for compute. So the computations your phone can make in one
Yeah.
second doubles every 18 months. And at one point, it becomes unnoticeable to you because there's only so much you can do with your phone, right? So that's where we're at the moment, right? So if somebody's trying to sell you a phone that you can now close or open or that can fly, well, that's the reason, because we're at the end of what what we can sell people with the phones, with the compute, right? There's no reason to add more to this. Thomas.
I was just going to add, yeah, with storage, I think it's a bit slower, but with how flash memory has evolved, with going from hard drive spinning disks to SSD and now NVMe, which is even smaller and even thinner. It's basically like having those American strips of gum that come in like an elongated kind of thing. That's basically how memory is now in computers. So if you buy a new laptop, they usually have a memory that's this long and this thin and this big. So it's really small, but it's quite expensive because of the speed of read and copy.
So the second computer I had in my life was an Atari, because I used that to make music. And who here remembers LPs, like really vinyl records, like that thing, right? And now imagine a stack of vinyls that high. Let's say that's probably 30 records. Okay. So stack of 30 records, that's the volume. That was my hard drive. Now, you would be hard pressed to find a thumb drive today with that little storage space. I think maybe the smallest thumb drive that you can get is a gig or something. Well, I had 500 megabytes on this thing. 500 megabytes. You don't even think about that, right? But that's this curve. Okay. So what's going to happen next? Who knows, right? But it continues, stacked S curves. And that's how the overarching compute curve, that's what Moore's law describes. But it goes through different phase shifts. And any organization that gets stuck in one of these will die, right? The technology will die. So that's why everybody wants to innovate all the time. Okay, now let's move into well, let's look at it from the lens of mostly from startups, because those are the ones that usually come up with this new stuff, and see how they do this, how they actually apply all of that to navigate accelerating environments that are becoming more and more complex, more and more quickly. Okay. So what does a sailor do to move a ship to the destination? How's that done? Any sailors here? Okay, Alim. Yes.
How does the sailor steer the ship safely to the destination?
Yeah.
By using the wind and the waves and the current
Mhm.
in the correct way.
Okay. And so if you say your ship is here, your destination is here, and you start moving, and there's wind, and there's waves, and there's pirates, and other things, then what happens? You go like this, right?
Exactly.
You usually don't go like this. You go like this, and then you go like this, and this, this, and this, right? What does the sailor do? The sailor continuously observes the environment, its the own position relative to the position of the destination, and then acts accordingly, changes course, right? Trivial, but when you think about it, um, but that's what a sailor does. So why is that interesting? This is the ancient Greek word for the sailor, for the person steering the ship. Have you heard the term cybernetics? Yeah, that comes from this term. Where does cybernetics come from? What does that signify? It's the first field of science that has an actual date in which it was invented, in which it was started, in which it was coined. And it dates back to the 30s and 40s, where to the so-called Macy conferences. There was a foundation, the Macy Foundation, and they financed the leading scientists of the world in various fields. So they were non-competing because they were both leading and in different fields, into yearly retreats in which they just exchanged ideas. And they did that for a couple of years until they could put words to something that they had noticed, which was at a fundamental, very abstract level, they were all doing the same thing. And that was, they were constantly defining a destination, identifying their current position, and then adjusting course. And they called that cybernetics, which today is called systems systems dynamics, right? Complex systems, science around what complex systems do. Okay. So in an applied way, you could look at it as this name here. Oh, wow. Ship going through the ice. Okay, so OODA loop. It's one of my favorite military technologies. It stands for orient, observe, decide, act. Okay? That's exactly what you do. That's also what you do as a startup. Lean startup talks about build, measure, learn. And then again, build, measure, learn. Generally, that's called a feedback loop. It's all the same thing. It's what you do when you started walking. How many times did you try to walk before you could actually walk? Anybody remembers? 400 times, roughly, on average. You have to fall 400 times before you can walk. So it takes a long time, and then suddenly you can walk. Okay. It's a bit intense. Ice is breaking against your ship. Okay. So, I said we're going to look at this from the lens of startups, and most startups are in the field of software development, right? So it's not a real surprise that the US Army general disrupted that field. And his analogy wasn't a ship or a sailor. His analogy was a pilot and a jet. Because a pilot does exactly the same thing, just a little bit faster. You don't land your plane by giving it the coordinates of the airport and then go and have a coffee. You land your plane safely by observing constantly and adjusting. Now, this general was tasked with solving or rescuing a very complex, big software project that was going sideways massively. And what he discovered was that the team that was building the software, both the people that were managing and the people that were actually building, were doing something that was similar to putting in the coordinates for your airport and then go and have a coffee. What they did was they wrote this big specification, hundreds of pages, and then they dropped that specification in the cellar or wherever the software developers were, right? And then they came back 2 or 3 years later to see what had come out of that. And that was obviously a big waste of resources. Huge. Because first of all, it's very easy to understand any language, but it's much easier to it's very easy to misunderstand any language, but it's much easier to misunderstand hundreds of pages of specifications. So it's an interpretation problem, one. Second problem is that the world had moved on in the time, right? There's a couple of years, you're waiting, you're building some software, but the specification that you've written for one world was probably outdated once you had written the specification already, but definitely when you've written the software. Okay. Now, they came up, even if it worked, and even if it was somewhat aligned with the specification, was something that the world didn't need anymore, that somebody else had already done in a different way. Big waste of resource. Okay. So he started behaving like a pilot that wants to land a plane safely. That is what agile software development does. And that's what the terms Scrum and Kanban and maybe others stand for, but those are the most prominent. So I want to run through an example of what Scrum actually looks like in real life. But are we clear so far? Is there anything you'd like to discuss, or any feedback, anything, questions? No? You're good. Okay. So how do you translate creating something huge into small bits and pieces and you understand where you're going? That's roughly the same as you're going through with the visioning process. You're dreaming up something, right? But if you've dreamt it up, you want to go there. So you need to, and there's a big temptation to write a huge book about that, like the big specification, and then tell everybody about that book so that everybody can start behaving accordingly. But what you could also do is hold that dream for yourself and start taking the first step. That's what a Scrum team does. So the person holding the dream of the product is the product owner. And the product owner knows where she's taking that thing. Okay? So she has this massive vision, dream, maybe a strategy, but she holds it. Right? And the team doesn't necessarily need to know anything about the big thing. What she does is she tells the team what she wants to see at the end of a sprint. The end of a sprint is, or a sprint is, a time box of 1, 2, or 3 weeks, mostly 2 weeks. So what can you achieve in 2 weeks? Okay, so she describes roughly what she thinks she can get in 2 weeks. That is broken down into tasks, individual, simple tasks. And then the team discusses those tasks. And this is literal. So everybody's in a room and they're discussing, they're trying to understand what these tasks are about. And what they then do is something really weird. They play Scrum poker. So there's a series of numbers that look like they're exponential. It's called the Fibonacci sequence. It's where you add the previous number. You add two numbers. You start with 0 and 1. You add those two. They obviously become 1. But then you have 1 and the result of those two, which is 1 and 1, and then that results in 2. So the next result is 3 and 5 and 8 and 13 and 21 and so on. So it moves like this. And so you can get them off Amazon, for example. You can buy a set of Scrum cards, Scrum poker cards that have these numbers. And the team then does is they rely on their intuition. See how that relates to the flow thing, challenge, skill, right? Your intuition based on your interpretation of the challenge and your current skill set. How difficult is this? How long will this take? And then they turn that in their head into one of these numbers between 0 and 21 on the Fibonacci scale. Take the card, and on the count, they hold it up. And now you have probably anything between 0 and 21 because of different skill levels, because of different interpretations, everything. And the person with the highest number and the person with the lowest number now discuss how they arrived at their numbers in front of the team. And they discuss until both have laid out their points, and then you repeat it. Now the distribution of numbers is much lower. You repeat that process until the team agrees on one number. Right? So it already sounds very much like getting to a destination. Going like this and until you hit it. You do that for all of the tasks. And then you just try to do, first sprint, you try to get as many tasks done as possible. And then you count how many complexity points, how many of these points did you actually achieve during your sprint? And if you do that for 2 or 3 sprints, you know exactly how many points of complexity the team can achieve during a sprint. And now you can start planning much better. And it only works for exactly that team in exactly that context. The team has to learn that. After 2, 3 sprints, it becomes stable and people can begin to actually have some confidence in the planning, because that's what then the managers are concerned about. Oh, you have this release on this and that date because there's this conference or this fair and I need to do this, or I need it by then. Well, we can't tell you we're going to have it by then. But we can tell you that every 2 weeks, every sprint, we have a result that you can actually use. So you can re-steer, you can adjust to the demands of the market, to the demands of whoever you're dealing with. Now, there's an important role in all of this. Who's the Scrum Master? The Scrum Master's job is to take care of the process, nothing else. So take care that there's a planning meeting in which what I just described happens. Product owner describes what she wants in the form of tasks. Team estimates, okay, fine. Then the team also has daily stand-ups. The team gets together once a day and everybody just briefly says what they're going to do today, what they were doing yesterday, and what they're blocked on. And if there's any blocks, it's a Scrum Master's job to remove them. You need a bigger machine, Scrum Master has your back. Some team members annoying you, Scrum Master has your back. You haven't understood part of the task, Scrum Master has your back. Scrum Master is there to just make your life as easy as possible so you can actually focus on the work and build the task, whatever it is. Then there's a review meeting in which the team receives feedback from the product owner about the result. So there is something usable, the product owner looks at it, and she gives feedback on, is that actually what she wanted? And then there's the meeting, the retro meeting, which is used to look at the process itself. So does this process work for the team? Do we need to change something about that process? Or are we fine? Is everything good? That's on a meta level. That happens not every sprint, that happens every couple of sprints to adjust the process itself. So it's self-adjusting process. Okay, that's how modern software teams, and modern meaning in the last 20, 25 years, build software. Kanban works in a similar way. It's a different religion, but same God. Okay, so it really doesn't matter what the differences are for here. It's you can you if you understand what I've described just now, you understand agile software development. Okay. So does this make sense? Any additions here? Alim, you had your hand up a while ago. Does it still apply?
No, I just wanted to say by using these Fibonacci numbers, it's possible to find the perfect golden ratio, which is 1.618.
Yeah, but for exactly that context, right? Exactly that
No,
context.
that's a good.
There's a difference whether you're building a rocket ship or the software for a rocket ship, and by the way, as I say, rocket ship, this also applies to modern software today. Right? It's not only used for software development. There's a thing that's well documented by Google Ventures. It's called the design sprint. Design sprint uses that frame of agile software development or agile development and applies it to product development, to ideation processes. Have you played with design thinking and theory U, things like that, right? Things in which you, again, might sound familiar. Double diamond, right? You open up, you close down. You open up, you close down. And that's what you do in a process like design thinking and theory U. And if you package that in the form of a sprint, then what you get is something that helps you develop your product faster without developing software or hardware or anything. So that in those cases, you bring together the team and you clarify the goal, really clarify the goal to research, discuss what we actually want to achieve. What is the main question we want to find out? And then you open up. So that's the beginning, right? Very precise. You open up and you say, okay, what are the best strategies to answer our question? And you go really crazy. Another tool for really going crazy is called Crazy 8. You take a piece of paper, you fold it 3 times, and that creates like a comic book shape, right? 8 boxes. You have the question, how do we best find out an answer to our main question for the sprint? And you have 8 minutes to come up with 8 drawings of how to answer your question. That's pressure, the time pressure, and the pressure of drawing and the pressure of space limitation and all of that plays together to really help you spark your creativity. I've seen people do 16 drawings in 8 minutes with that. Then you narrow it down again. You say, okay, through a process, of course. You narrow it down to the one thing you want to do to find out what the answer is. Then you build it. You build a prototype, and the prototype has the widest possible definition in the context of a design sprint. You build a prototype, and you test it in the field, out there with people. When we first started doing that, before Google came up with their definition, we did design sprints with, and we wanted to get thousands of signals. So we put things out there and targeted thousands of euros as marketing lead buying clicks somewhere on Google, Facebook, etc. That's something we put out there to get some data, right? Then you go and interpret that data, and you have an answer to your question. And you do that within 3, 4, or 5 days. That's a design sprint. And it saves you millions, literally. Because you could find out whether you're on the right track or not with your product development before you build that robot, where the development might cost 50 million or something like that. You find out whether it actually makes sense building a robot or whether something else might do the job. So real world example, we once did something with a startup that wanted to see how they could do something useful with solar and drones. Right? There's a bunch of things you can think about. The second sprint, they tested whether managers of solar farms were interested in having a service in which they could book drone pilots to fly drones over the solar park that had thermal cameras, because a thermal camera can tell you the efficiency of a specific solar panel with some software that would then interpret that. And the prototype was a 2-sided PDF describing that service and a list of, I think, 20 phone numbers of managers of solar parks. So that was, the startup was 2 weeks old, literally, when they had their first 10 customers. They didn't even have a product, because when they did the test on Friday with those 20 phone numbers, the people immediately signed up. That's a real luxury. A month later, they had their first investment of 1 million, and they built that stuff. That's what you do with a design sprint. That's the power of a design sprint. Okay, makes sense so far? Okay. So we'll have a break now, and then I will unpack what OKRs means. OKR, finally. Okay. So I'll maybe take another 15 minutes or so to go through the rest, and then we I'd like you to ask all questions that you have on your minds. Try to embarrass yourself or me when you ask them. That would be good. Okay. So here we were, right? We talked about agile software development. We discovered that if we pair this with creativity inducing activities like design thinking, then we can actually use that for other things as well. There's something interesting going on in the field of building physical products that is also aligned with that. You can look at Tesla for that. If you've noticed, Tesla is really good at producing all sorts of things. Right? It's who here who here thinks Tesla is a car company? So only a few. Who here thinks Tesla is not a car company? So what do you think if you haven't put your hand up on either of those two? Lars, you saying something? You're muted.
Not saying
Mine.
something. I was just enjoying myself. But of course, vehicles, but it's basically a computer, right?
It's a computer, yeah. That's definitely one way of looking at it. It's also literally a vehicle, but could be also a vehicle for something else. Ina, what was your take?
No, I was thinking it's a tech company,
Uh-huh.
like an innovation
Yeah,
company.
yeah.
I don't know.
So it's really funny that every couple of years, Elon puts on the company blog what he's going to do in the next couple of years, and then he does it, and then the world really thinks he's crazy, but at the end, they see that he has done it, and he actually did. He actually told them what he was going to do. So, what if you read those, then you will discover that Tesla mostly is an energy company. And the car is a really good vehicle to distract the world from the fact that you're building an energy company of the 21st century, right? Because what do you need for an energy company of the 21st century? You need a grid to distribute electricity because it's probably going to be electricity. Okay, so you build a supercharger network to heal the fear, the range anxiety that people have. Okay, so you have a supercharger network, you have a grid. You buy your cousin's company that you helped co-found, the name Solar City, and have the largest solar farm in the US. And you build gigafactories to produce all the batteries that buffer the stuff in between. If that doesn't sound like an energy company of the 21st century, then I don't know what does. And all of those you can build under the umbrella of we're just building a car. And then what you also do is, because you need to learn how to build stuff, because so far you've only done things like PayPal, you need to learn how to actually produce hardware at scale. And that creates enormous flexibility in the production process. So for example, I don't know if Tesla uses that, but there's a very interesting innovation that came out of a university in Germany that is now being used at major car companies in Germany that a friend of mine came up with, and which is, and it works specifically for electric cars, and where you might have seen these pictures of car factories. Right? There's this big robots carrying big pieces of metal around and moving things and all of that. Well, in their process, the first thing they do is they create the drivetrain and put the wheels on, because then the car can drive itself through the factory. And if the car can drive itself through the factory, there's no need for conveyor belts or robots that push the car around or anything. And you have enormous flexibility. So they can change the production process anytime. I can apply agile optimization processes to actual hardware production. Cool. Okay. So, Dana Meadows. If you've read the Limits to Growth report or know about it, Dana Meadows was one of the leading scientists on this. And she wrote a list of potential levers to use if you want to change a system. And she, in her unconventional thinking, she ranked them from 12 to 1, 12 being the least important. 1, the last on the list, is the power to transcend paradigms. Right, so that's horizon 3. Shifting the goal function of your entire system. That's what this is. So you're not trying to get to your destination. You're trying to move the destination before you even get there. Because maybe the destination is closer, or maybe it's over there. So, right? So think about the destination first. And it's really
Like
surprising.
reverse engineering.
Sorry?
Like reverse engineering.
Yeah, you exactly. So you have the product and then you reverse engineer. So you want to ask, what is success? Right? Who here has been in a meeting in some organization? Right? Everybody has been in some meeting in some organization. How often have you started the meeting with the question, what is success for this meeting? Not very often, right? Yeah. Yeah, you've probably been in Nina, right? So you've probably been in some startup in your life or something close to that, since you know all of these words and things. But something fundamentally changes if you ask, what is success for this meeting? Because then everybody gets focused on that question and doesn't push around some interesting or weird agendas. Okay. I've talked about chips earlier. As you know, one of the largest chip company is Intel. And I mentioned Moore's law. Moore was one of the founders of Intel. It's actually not a law, right? It's an observation. He was on the technical side, and he discovered that there seems to be this pattern of doubling in compute in 18 months for the same price. His buddy, Andy Grove, was also one of the founders of Intel. And he was more on the people management side. And he was more in measuring the process, right? So measuring outcomes, understanding whether somebody has achieved their goals and all of that. How to use that in management lingo? KPIs, right? Anybody heard that term? KPIs? Key performance indicators, right? Key KPIs are really, really good for if you have a production of hard-boiled eggs or something like that. Because you can measure every point in the chain, you can know how many eggs break and aren't hard in the end and are too hard and break and whatever, right? You can measure every point in the chain. It's really good for hard-boiled eggs, but it's not so good for humans. So what he invented was the system of OKRs, objectives and key results. And it'll all sound so familiar and so almost boring if I now tell you what this big thing is. But it will also tie right into the beginning of what I was sharing earlier. So the objective is nothing more but the goal you want to achieve. But a goal should be something that cannot be quantified by itself. There's not a goal like we want to have sold 30,000 units in the next quarter. The goal should be more something like we want to be recognized by the competition as something they should be afraid of. That's an objective. And then your key results are proxies that tell you whether you are actually moving towards that goal. So one key result could be that you have bought one of your competitors and one has closed and two others have offered you to buy them or something like that, right? Something that you can quantify, some numbers, something that you can actually work on. And what you typically do is that you have OKRs on all levels of the organization. So you have them on an individual level, you have them on the team level, but you also have them on a company level. And that way, they can cascade. So the company objectives can be something really big, and then you can break them down into objectives for the various departments and teams and individuals. But again, here, it's important to measure them. Right? In specific timeframes. So measuring them once a month or every 3 months is the usual practice. And what you want to get to is something that's very, very similar as the flow channel. It's related to the flow channel. So when we set goals, we usually set them either too high or too low, right? If we want to be sure we achieve them, we can set them low. And if it's really important to us, we might set them too high if we're too unrealistic. What we want to achieve overall is a key result achievement rate of 70% across the company, roughly 70, 75, something like that. That's healthy. It's healthy because your goals are a bit more challenging than you can actually achieve, but not too challenging so that you break down and don't achieve anything. Okay. So if you measure and your achievement rate is higher than 75%, you will have to start leveling up your objectives. They have to be a bit more challenging, and vice versa, of course. And that's hard. It's really hard. And it takes time, again, right, to get this right. And it allows you to also adapt your goals every month, every 3 months. And it creates a system in which the entire company can do this. So Intel used that. And and to tap into what's Ruben said in that context, working from the outcome and then reverse engineering that, there was a time when the board of Intel wanted to kick out Andy Grove from his own company in the role of the CEO, which has happened to several people. But what he and his co-CEO did was they took a couple of days, went completely out for anything, and asked themselves, what would the people do that are put in our place? What would they do? And by reframing their perspective on the company and on the role, they managed to come up with something that this person or team would do. And then they just did it themselves. And that's what OKRs help you do, right? Force you to reframe every couple of months. So you don't get stuck in your standard objectives. If you do that for too long, if your objectives never change, then you know that something is going wrong. You're not achieving them. You're never achieving them. So if you don't achieve them, something is off. You want to achieve them. You want to replace them. Okay. So that's a very, very powerful management tool. And Sergey and Larry from Google claim that their success can in part be attributed to the idea of OKRs, because their first investor had learned that system at Intel and had taken it to Google. That gave them the agility they needed. Okay. So I don't really know what I'm trying to say here with this meaning in life and meaning of life in that context. But there's a big important difference between those two, right? You can ask yourself, what is the reason for life? What is the meaning of life? Why is there life? Did anybody put it here? Is there something that I'm not noticing that organizes everything? Yes, maybe. But honestly, I don't care. What I care about is meaning in life. That thing that I'm experiencing, that thing that I am doing, acknowledging that there's so much more out there and around me that I will never notice. But I can create a life that has meaning in it. Regardless of whether life in general has meaning, doesn't matter. And so that tries to circle back to the beginning. What is life actually? And tie in that we need to have a destination, something to strive towards, something that makes life worth living. I've heard people come up with 200-year plans for their family. And that's a good measure. You will not achieve what you set out to do. You will not grow, probably not grow to see something in 200 years, but you will see a trajectory towards that, and you will see that other people will take on what you've been doing, and that gives the possibility to also let go of stuff in between. Because if it doesn't serve your 200-year goal, why should you be working on it? Okay, so the end of the stuff I had prepared. Now let's go into embarrassing ourselves. Who wants to start?
Okay, I can go.
Thank you.
We were thinking in a break in our team, like, how can we just do a scrum process? And from what you described, it seems like a thing to do as part of ideation. And like, what is a good way to set up a scrum process? And how do you start? And do you need a product owner? Or yeah, it's a good way of just hopping into it.
So my plan is to run you through a kind of sprint process next week. Not a Scrum, because Scrum is very specific for software engineering, but using the elements of a sprint, and in order to more on the product development side, right? To work on to help you work on the on what your team wants to build, what your team wants to create, the project your team has. Yes, it's absolutely useful, and yes, we'll go into some practical parts of it. Yeah, I will actually. It's a bit early now, but I will actually ask you to present your project through the lens of the dream that you will present on Friday as the next step. So beginning of next week, I want to hear that and already work on that.
Sorry, can you repeat? I didn't catch that.
Yeah, so the project that you as a team are working on. Yeah, currently, I'm not sure you have developed a real sketch of the project. Have you? No. Okay. So now you can take your dream and say, maybe this is a cool project in the context of my dream, of our shared dream to work on, because something will reveal itself as you talk about it. Yeah. Then I want you to prepare an idea for a project to work on, to give us some context to work as a sprint, right? Then you can still find out whether that's a good project or not, whether you want to shift. But that'll save you a lot of time. Right? So first create some meaning, some purpose. What's that thing that you want to see in 200 years or 100 years or 50 years or on another planet? That's why we do this exercise. Where do you want to go? And then you have to ask yourself, so what is it that I need to do to get there? Obviously, right? I mean, otherwise, any dreaming doesn't make any sense if you don't go. So long answer. What else?
One question, Thomas. Whenever talking with these beautiful young minds, there's often this thing, I don't know where to go because the world is basically so complex that it's really difficult to tell direction. Like there's so many things, I just need to see what is happening and everything is possible and it's more the journey. And you're a bit talking about that it's important to find destinations.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
do you have any clue of why we go into that trap of that's not important and how to start to work on getting into a more objective oriented approach to life when you have not been trained doing it?
Mm-hmm. So okay, let's invoke again the picture of getting to a destination as a sailor, right? Maybe I'll do it this way. I'm gonna share my screen and draw it, and maybe that makes more sense here. So let's see, get the controls out of the way here so that I can do this thing here. Okay, space. So let's say you want to go here. Let's say that you are here. And now like we use that. So this is how you get there, right? Oops. I'm going to shortcut this. You know what I mean. So, okay. Now, let's imagine if this is your goal. Let's make the goal a color. Okay. And here is where we are. So let's say this here is your 200-year goal. And let's say you set a goal for here. That is your five-year goal, some graduation or promotion or something like that. Huh? So what's the difference between taking this goal, setting this goal, and setting this goal? So If
if
you
you
set, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, like if you set if the 5-year goal is your like main goal, and you set direction for that, you maybe miss the 200 years goal because where you're staring at is going totally in another direction instead of aiming for the 200-year goal. And if you already put that in the long term goal, you will aim you will hit that one. Very badly explained.
No, but that's
But
that's
you have
right.
the
That's why I
coordinate
had to
like
put it into a picture because I'm lacking the word to properly explain what I sense, right? So there's a if you put your goal far out, it becomes easier for you to say what fits the what helps you achieve the goal. Because it's easier to say no. So if your goal is world peace, do you need a master in engineering? Maybe, maybe not, but maybe something that helps you become head of the UN is more helpful, and master in engineering doesn't really help you on the way to become head of the UN. Something like that, right? Does it give a sense for the difference? Ina, you wanted to say something too.
Yeah, but that was a completely different question.
Okay, I want to add one more concept to this that I think helps in making more sense of that. And then you can ask a question if it's still relevant. There's this idea in a beautiful little book called Finite versus Infinite Games. You heard that? Okay. So the difference between a finite and an infinite game is that you play a finite game to win it, and you play an infinite game to play it. So you might have had the experience that I had as a child playing Monopoly, where once it becomes clear that one party would win, then you start changing the rules. Because it's more fun to continue to play than for one to win. Then you're in the infinite game mode. You can do this for days. We've played Monopoly for days because it was fun, right? Not because somebody won, specifically because nobody won, because we change the rules all the time. Okay. Now, you know how to win at games, right? You know how to win at graduating from school. You weren't here, you wouldn't be here if you hadn't won that game, right? Okay, now you're winning the next game. Fine, cool. You can win at the game of fulfilling all of the markers that the socialized mindset wants you to achieve, to signal to everybody else that you are a really, really good player of in society, that everybody can trust you, that you're doing the right thing. You have a house, you have a car, you have a partner, you have some kids, you have a cat, mouse, whatever, right? Can be really, really good at that. But if you go into infinite game mode, you might see that some of these achievements aren't really that fulfilling. They're just not fun. Why would you do that? And setting your goal high, really, really high, unachievably high, helps you with that. I have a suspicion that Elon's Mars goal is such a thing. And I don't know. I've only spoken to him once, and I didn't have that question then. I had a different question about the governance on Mars, which we had a really, really good answer. But I have the suspicion that he's actually not that interested in going to Mars. He's interested in building new infrastructure. Because everything he's building for Mars can be used on a climate chaotic planet as well. Interesting. Okay. I hope that was some, in all of that mess, there was something that answered that question that Lars pulled up. Ina.
Yeah. No, I was just wondering about, you're asking us questions all the time. And I was just wondering, what's your take on what this world needs the most right now?
But it's always difficult to question is, which perspective do I take? Um, my instinct immediately would say love. Have you played with Ikigai by any chance? Ikigai? Yeah. It's this reduction of a Japanese concept of coming up with your purpose of life. Asking questions like, what are you good at? What can you be paid for? What fulfills you, and what does the world need? So I once played that with the board of a really, really successful company, one of the 5 market leaders in the world in that segment. By the way, all 50 something, white and male, right? And after going through all of the first 3 questions, I told them, okay, now we need to find out what the world needs. Here's 1 hour. In 1 hour, I want to hear from you. What does the world need? These guys came back. So remember, right? Serious managers, turning many, many billions, all suits, all pale, all 50 years old. All of the markers. They came back with one word, and it was love. I couldn't believe it. Really, I couldn't. And I think it points to something. If we reconnect with what we already know is there, with our humanness, our real humanness, if we cut through all of the markers, all of the finite game playing, we can play those games if they help us, if they're fun, if they serve us, but we don't take them seriously. If we cut through that, we know what's there. There's only ever at maximum 2% of the population that wants to do something that is harmful to others, some socio or psychopaths, right? That's roughly 2%. Everybody else wants to live a good life with loved ones, with some time to explore, to live, to enjoy, to relax, to sing, to dance, to bake bread, to make love, all of these things. We know that. But why the heck do we try to do all of this other bullshit all the time? There's no point. Other than serve some collective illusions. And saying that love could be the most important thing is pointing towards that. You could also just say trust, something like that. Radically trust other people. We've had just one more story. We've had, with my software company, we've had a large open office, and we've had these electronic keys, I think 80 or something. And after a while, there weren't any keys anymore. Everybody had a key. But there were so many people that didn't even remotely belong to the company that also had a key. We had huge parties. Nothing was ever stolen there. Nothing. Zero. Nil. It was, I don't know how many thousands of euros worth of Apple laptops and stuff like that sitting around there. Nothing was stolen, ever. Radical trust. Nina.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting because like I feel the word love and also talking about it comes up all the time, and probably more and more also in the conversation that I'm having in everyday life. But it's just or at least I feel like it's a tendency to that we talk about it. Also probably in this class that most of us see that this is one of the most important things that we would need back in society, and also that we should focus more on. But then you go back to everyday life and then it kind of disappears. You go back to the systems and you go back to whatever is happening, the work, and then you get stressed, and then you just go back to the systems. And I don't know if it's a question, but I'm kind of like, I don't know, I get a bit frustrated almost every day of why, even me, like, why can't we just change it and then change it more radically than we're doing? And I see a lot of people trying, but it's, yeah, I don't know. I wonder, like, what do you think would be most efficient?
I think so what I'm trying to do is identify the dependencies I have to the current system. And then reducing or removing those dependencies. And they can be on any level, right? They can be physical dependencies, but it can also be emotional or intellectual dependencies. And trying to move into some sort of agentic sovereignty around those. So that gives me a position to be in the system without being affected too much by the system, so that I can move freely and point towards things that don't make sense. So I get invited to these places, you know, there's this plush carpet that thick, waiters giving you everything all the time, right? You don't even have to move. Then some minister and 20 people have lunch together, and then that minister gives a little speech, and then can have a conversation about that speech. Usually people there wear uniforms like suits, right? I have my own uniform that I wear every day. But that's a different uniform. I have this weird hair that's totally planned, right? It's not not an accident that I have this. So I already look weird. And then I ask weird questions. And what happens is that people come to me afterwards and say, thank you for that question. I wanted to ask that too, but I didn't know how to. That happens all the time. And that's because I don't care what they think of me at all. I can embarrass myself entirely because I am independent of them emotionally, intellectually, and physically. And that gives you freedom. And then what you will discover, if you move into the world with that kind of freedom, that it'll be rewarded because everybody notices this and everybody wants it. And it will actually give you what you fear you might lose. Right? You'll get in that case, I could go in there fearing losing recognition, social recognition, but I'm actually gaining social recognition by polarizing. Interesting.
I'm muted. I was just like, want to follow up. Because I guess the answer just brings up a lot of more questions for me, and I guess a lot of ways I've wanted to break free of, like, for example, if you then ask us, okay, ask us questions, my brain goes directly into like, oh my God, what kind of question should I ask? What's the perfect question? No, that question isn't good enough. And then I realize that I can't even get to a good question because the way my brain works is hindering me in actually getting to what I'm curious about, which I know is a lot, but I'm not getting to the good questions. And then I need to do small talk to be able to get to a theme. And then I need to trick my mind into get to good conversations and questions.
Well, then use a different brain.
What do you
Use
mean?
a different brain. Yeah, it's called modeling. So there might be somebody you admire, right? Let's just pick a famous person that usually almost everybody can agree on, Obama. Okay? What is the question Obama would ask? Put yourself into that brain and ask that question. And figure out who are the people that you have something to learn from because you somehow admire them. So admiration might be a signal for you that there's something to learn for you. Because people know something or seem to know something that you don't. How interesting. Let's find out what. And so you pick your idols consciously to learn from them. And as you learn from them, you learn to think like them. And as you learn to think like them, you will ask other questions. That's how I do it.
Yeah. And I guess like also becoming relaxed makes those questions pop up, or being playful, being in a mindset of being playful, then it kind of pops up automatically. But it's just a matter of getting there.
100%, right? 100%. Do you remember what I said about relaxation response versus fight or flight response?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly the point.
I'm scared shitless half of the time, but I know that it's also the way that I'm programmed to be. So it's, you know.
There's a really, really good book, and I'm eternally grateful to my mother that she gave it to me when I was 16. I think that's a perfect age to read it. It's called, I'm not entirely sure of the English title because it's a German author, but I put it in the chat later. It's Fritz Riemann's Grundformen der Angst, which is translates to basic forms of fear. And it's one of the foundations of modern psychology, in which he identifies 4 forms of fear and how they interact and how they function, and what kind of pathology is expressed through one of them being stronger than the others. And that gives you a really, really good framework to use fear as a partner, as an information system. Right? There's only very, very, very few times in my life have I really needed fear to survive. Right? Very few times. Most of the time, fear tells me something different. Right? And so when I was 18 and totally drunk and sitting on the bonnet of a car that was driving too fast towards a wall, I was scared shitless, right? It was completely stupid. And that's what you should be afraid of. But you shouldn't be afraid of being embarrassed by asking the wrong question. There's no such thing, right? So if you put that into context and you can categorize those fears for yourself, you can start seeing this as a partner. So when I become afraid of something, I usually say, aha, here you go again. What's up? What are you trying to tell me? And you put a filter between the action and the reaction. Right? Something happens that creates something in you. And if you can take one breath and ask yourself, okay, is what I'm going to do the right thing? Then you're getting closer to that, right? You're closing the loop between system 1 and system 2 by doing that. And if system 1 and system 2 start trying to do the same thing, then you don't have to be worried so much about your actions anymore. Right? If your system 1 was trained by your 7-year-old parents, who were trained by their 7-year-old their 7-year-old parents, remember? The system 1 evolution is very, very, very slow. And it does not fit any context that you're in. Of course you're going to be scared. You're going to be confused. So you have to unpack all of these finite games and social structures, socialized mindsets, pieces, goal sets that you have in order to put in some other heuristics that are relevant to you.
Yeah.
And that are then aligned with what you want to do. And again, it's this exact same process as I've been describing over and over again. This is the same process as a Scrum process or a design sprint or life itself. You're just applying it to your thinking, to your own self.
Yeah. Because right now my reaction would be just prep yourself out of it so that I'm not going to be scared in the moment, because I know that I'm going to sit on good questions before I even get to the point.
It's a good practice, for sure. In reality, you know that you cannot predict what's going to happen.
Exactly.
So, but it's good practice. You've primed your brain with the right kind of thinking. Yes. And then you'll more likely come up with a good question during the thing.
That's true. Okay, I'm gonna stop asking.
Lars.
In the story about love, Thomas, you really answered the question, because what I sense when we have these talks about not knowing what I want, it's basically because you can't find yourself in this fog of collective illusions that have created you. And then you feel yourself, but still you see yourself partly in the filters of the collective illusion. And then you start to find yourself, and then first you go through the process of finding yourself in the clouds of the collective illusions, and then the next thing is, how can I, in that reality, create a vision of what I truly want? And what I really feel, and I recognize that from my own youth, how exhausting that game is. So I really understand why some of you guys are so tired, because you have entered a school that actually tried to help you find that authentic voice. And that process is extremely demanding, and then offers you to try to create your life in accordance to what you really want to do in life. And that's true. It's a double exhausting process. But it's a game you're invited into. And you answered that in a really, really beautiful way. And maybe some part of that is to recognize that and take it in really, really small steps and be really compassionate about yourself and seeing that's a game you're playing. Because I didn't see that when I was your age. It took me a bit longer to learn that that was the game. But now we have these conversations, Thomas, and that's why we enjoy it so much, because we help each other to understand going through those processes and try to help next generation not to have to go through it alone and in such a hard way.
And sometimes
Does that
I
give
wonder
me?
whether,
Yeah.
yeah. Ina.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for that story about those 50 white males who ended up wanting more love. That was like, yeah, it really, there was so much information in that story. Thank you.
My pleasure. Yeah, I think you could embarrass yourself by going out and telling people that what you think is the most important thing in the world, that the world needs right now, and to discover in the process that there's a high probability that other people will share what you say, and that's how you can break through that collective illusion, right? Because everybody, you would assume that everybody says something like, well, we need to solve climate change, and we have to save the economy, and we have to find new sources of energy. And well, are these the most important things in the world? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe not. Okay, Nina.
Yeah, and now for a moment I started to wonder maybe people are laughing in the other room because I'm raising my hand again, but it might be something else. Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Anyway,
Doesn't matter. You can feel embarrassed and be proud.
exactly. That's why I went for it either way. But my question is actually for the rest of the class. For the people who haven't asked the question yet, I'm curious about what makes it so that you are not asking a question in this space right now.
Thank you. That's a nice one. Go make a copy.
I don't want to put anyone on the spot.
Personally,
It was just
right now I thought the lesson was over 25 minutes ago, so that's why I'm not asking questions, but I might be mistaken about the time.
No, you're not. We're just playing here.
Yeah.
But you haven't really spoken earlier either, so it still applies. It still applies. But basically, the conversation today was between Nina, Ina, Lars, and me. And Alim also said something, and Thomas a little bit, right? So, and Ruben once, but it's only half of the people. So that's an interesting question. Thank you, Nina. I'd like to hear that too. I'm gonna make a coffee while you think about it. But I'll take you along so I can answer if you have something.
I can answer the question like why I'm not asking that much questions, and I think that's it. For me, it takes some time to like process everything we are talking about, and it takes some time, and it might be about the things you are saying that I'm afraid of to embarrass myself. But it just takes some time to think through it all for me.
Yeah, and with me, I would ask you a question all the time, so it would be too many. Because I don't understand 50% of what we're talking about. But I get some, how to say, some sprinkles here and there, so I can grab, and then I can look it up later if I want to or not. So, and if we could go into every subject a much more deeper, so it's more like, yeah. And then I also want to like sit down and reflect on this stuff if, yeah.
Okay. Aline.
I want to learn. I not learn, but I just make it through it away. And in a society, when you begin to ask questions, and if you are the only one, or if you are the one just in a few who is asking the weird questions, and after a time, you're feeling okay, a little bit get tired and getting bored, and because of like being seen as a black chicken or black bird or black swan, and this is how can you handle this feeling? Sometimes, as you said, it might sound so stupid, and sometimes you might feeling like really embarrassed, and then all just or just feeling of shame. But how you can fix this, like in getting, or how can a person like get rid of all these boring feelings and getting tired, being so tired feelings?
Mm.
It's actually so hard, like it's really tiring to face and to be always the black one in the society,
Until it's
in
not.
the group.
Until it's not. So
Okay.
when I'm just going to pick a current example. I we're, as you know, we're spending some time in Costa Rica, and life is different there. And really living there is was very exhausting for me, because you have to, yeah, nothing comes naturally, because everything, starting with the language, with the food, with the streets, with the culture, with the people, everything is different, right? But I noticed that every time I come back, I feel that difference less. I noticed that, for example, with driving in a car, driving in a car in Europe is like floating. You don't have to think about whether the road is intact, right? You just don't have to think about this. You can just go. So you can focus on other things. Well, that's pretty deadly in Costa Rica. There are about 2 or 3 roads in the whole country that don't have potholes or something like that. Okay. So you're constantly aware, you're constantly looking at the road, and it's super exhausting until it's not. Till you have found a way of dealing with it. That's called learning, right? So you can learn how to be in the mode of being the outsider, and how to actually enjoy that. Enjoy that process of learning. Feel yourself learning. And that's that's when you're on the top of the flow channel, right? When you actively put yourself into positions of higher challenge than you can actually deal with right now. Slightly, but continuously. You know, you can start by just wearing your t-shirt inside out. And people will ask you, what are you doing? What are you doing? You can explain them something. You can tell them that you're on a constant fashion revolution. Literally. You can tell them that you want to find out how many people point it out. You can just walk around and notice how many people see it but don't say anything. Then you can come to conclusions. They won't say anything because they're probably just as embarrassed as you are. Or you can invite people for dinner and have tall talks and ask them about what is it that really, really is important to you? How do you want to die? And if you do that often enough, you will figure out that everybody wants the same fundamental thing. And if you find that out, that's liberating as fuck, right? Everybody wants the same. You can cut through all of the layers of nonsense very easily. And you can notice that all of the layers of nonsense that everybody is carrying around, you don't have to burden yourself with them. It takes practice. It's not easy to get there, but you can get there. Then it becomes fun and playful. And sometimes it hurts. But thank you for those responses, because sometimes when I speak and I don't get reactions, I think that what I'm saying is boring you, or doesn't make any sense. So I'm glad it at least gets you thinking, or if you don't understand something, then it's probably better to stop and ask, because it's probable that others haven't understood it either. And maybe you can embarrass me by pointing towards something that I myself haven't understood. Then we can find it out together. Okay, so I think we're good for today. You look tired. Thank you. And so just to clarify, what do we do tomorrow? Tomorrow we meet here at what was the time? 9:30.
9:30 and to 12, so there's both time to work and be together, right?
Cool, fun. Just because I haven't planned exactly what I'm going to do tomorrow. Are there any wishes what we do tomorrow morning that I should take into account?
Can we say that if there's some burning questions, they can be posted in the WhatsApp?
Yeah, that's good.
During the day, the teams can talk together and say, what are our needs? What do we need? How are we in the process? How can we support that? And just post it in the chat. So it's a communication thing, and the ones of you are silent that need the process to be a bit different or whatever your reactions, post it there so we can see where we are. And maybe that's not so scaring as taking the word here.
I think I know what we do tomorrow. I'm not telling you now. Nina, you had something.
Yeah, no, it was just from the conversations that I had with some people from the class from the last week. That one overarching thing would probably be if we could have like a, I don't want to say the word goal of the day, or like where we're going, or some kind of direction of, because I think then it would be easier to put like your brain into like, okay, we're going this way, this relates to this. Like for example, that you said OKRs, and kind of how are the different things related? Because I can also see the way that you're communicating is more like conversational and from topic to topic, and it's a bit more flowy. But also remotely, it is easier maybe to catch the different things and the, yeah, where we're going of some sort. I don't know if the rest of the class.
So what you want is some sort of a plan of what we're doing.
Yeah, or that if you do have one, maybe like tell us a little bit of, yeah, what the plan of the day is.
Mhm.
It's a little bit like the ship metaphor. We know where we are going in these weeks, but let's see where we need to go to get there.
Mhm. So just so I understand exactly, so I said I'm gonna talk about things like Scrum and OKRs.
Maybe like even just like, what's the success of this lecture? What's the success of today? What will you take away from it in the beginning?
Okay. Good. Yeah. Okay, it's another idea to play with. Thank you. That's something else we can use the chat for. So maybe you think about what success for tomorrow, the session tomorrow, would be for you. Everybody thinks about that. And I'm gonna disclose what I thought earlier, what we're gonna do tomorrow. So what we will do is we will all rename ourselves and give ourselves the name X here in this in the Zoom tomorrow morning, first thing. We're all X. Because that way, if you put something in the chat, you have no idea where it comes from.
But pictures, we have pictures.
Not in the chat.
Yeah, okay.
And so then I will ask you to first present what you want to get out of the session tomorrow, but anonymously. Okay, that's where we will start.
Is that in the WhatsApp chat or is it in the Zoom?
No, that's here. That's here.
Okay, yeah.
So everybody can tell what you want to get out of the session. And nobody has to reveal who they are.
But the photo shows up in the chat as well.
Oh shit! Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's just an avatar. A lot of us doesn't have it, so maybe we can do something.
Yeah. We need to, yeah.
Maybe the letters, because the letters show up too.
But is it the? It's a good question. Who is Ine? Could you rename yourself to X and then write something in the chat, please?
You picked the one with the least competence in digital things.
Yeah. So
it works.
So that's how it works. So if you don't have an avatar picture, and you call yourself X, then it'll come anonymously. Boom.
Should we ask the question for the whole session with you? Like for
Yeah, for the whole session tomorrow. So,
Yeah,
so
like, but for the all the sessions or just for tomorrow?
just for tomorrow. So what's success for tomorrow? That's what we will share anonymously tomorrow as a start. And then we will improvise and agree on what success is, and then we do that. Yeah. Okay, so please make sure that you remove your avatar picture also tomorrow. Rename yourself to X, and then we're good to go. And you define what is success for tomorrow. So we'll build this session tomorrow. We'll build this together, and we'll hopefully find success. Does it work for everyone? Cool. That's going to be fun. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
you.
Ciao.